The King of the Streets is a term that has become more popular over the last few years in Formula 1 to crown the person who scored the most points over the season exclusively at street tracks. This got me thinking though, who was the King of the Streets in 2012, and 1988, and 1964, and 1950? So I set out on a quest to find out who was the King of the Streets in every year in F1 history. The first few years of F1 history is pretty straightforward, as there was only one street race, so whoever won that is King of the Streets. So the very first street race is won by Juan Manuel Fangio, who won the Monaco GP in 1950, but then Monaco wouldn't be on the F1 calendar again until 1955. 1951 had one street track, this time it was Pedralbes in Barcelona, and this was the only street track of the year again, and again won by Fangio to take his second crown. Then 1952 and 1953 didn't have any street tracks, before heading back to Barcelona, this time won by Mike Hawthorne, who becomes King of the Streets for 1954. Monaco then came back and Barcelona went away in 1955, and the Monaco GP was won by Maurice Trinquetant, who becomes King of the Streets. In 1956, Stirling Moss wins the Monaco GP, then in 1957, Fangio would reclaim the crown as he won the Monaco GP. But then, in 1958, something incredible happens as a second street track hits the F1 calendar when Porto joins Formula 1. Although this did raise an issue of what if one driver won one race, then didn't finish the other, and the driver who won the other didn't finish the first one, and then this happened meanwhile nobody else managed to score enough points to win overall. Then what would we do with King of the Streets? But surely this would never happen. In 1958, Maurice Trinquetant won the Monaco GP and didn't score any points in Porto. Stirling Moss would win in Porto and didn't score any points in Monaco. Meanwhile, no other driver scored over 8 points available for a win, so Trinquetant and Moss are joint King of the Streets for 1958. In 1959, Porto would be replaced by Monsanto in Lisbon. Jack Brabham won the Monaco GP but didn't score any points in Lisbon, and Stirling Moss would win in Lisbon and didn't score any points in Monaco. And again, nobody would get more points than the points given out for a win, so for the second year in a row, we have joint Kings of the Streets. Into the 1960s now, and Porto is back and Lisbon is out. Stirling Moss wins the Monaco GP, Jack Brabham wins the Porto race, so the King of the Streets is Bruce McLaren. What? McLaren finished second in both races, so got the most points and becomes the first ever King of the Streets to not win a street race in the year that they become King of the Streets. 1961 now, and we go back to the era of having one street race a year. And this era lasts until 1969, so again, the King of the Streets is the person who wins the Monaco GP. So in 1961, we have Stirling Moss for the fourth time. In 1962, we have Bruce McLaren for the second time. In 1963, we have Graham Hill for the first time. In 1964, we have Graham Hill for the second time. In 1965, we have Graham Hill for the third time. In 1966, we have Jackie Stewart for the first time. In 1967, we have Denny Hulme for the first time. And in 1968, we have Graham Hill for the fourth time. Then, in 1969, we have the return of a second street track, as a new Barcelona street track joins the calendar, called the Montjuic Park. And I'm sure we will not see any of the previous issues of having two street races pop up again. Graham Hill won the Monaco GP that year, but didn't finish in Barcelona, and Jackie Stewart won in Barcelona, but didn't finish in Monaco, and nobody got more points than you get for a win, so we have joint kings again, Graham Hill taking his fifth crown, and Jackie Stewart taking his second. Then we go back to one street track again for 1970, where Jochen Rindt wins the Monaco Grand Prix and becomes King of the Streets for the first time. Then Barcelona returns for 1971, Jackie Stewart would win in Monaco and Barcelona, taking F1's first perfect crown, winning every street race in a season where a season has more than one street race to get his third King of the Streets. 1972 had one street race again, won by Jean-Pierre Beltoise to become king. Then Barcelona returns again for 1973, it's won by Emerson Fittipaldi, while the Monaco GP was won by Jackie Stewart. But in Monaco, Fittipaldi finishes second, so secures enough points to become king of the streets for the first time. 1974 was the final year of F1 only having one street race, and as it was the Monaco GP, and it was won by Ronnie Peterson, we have King Ronnie Peterson. Barcelona returns again in 1975 for the final time, and it's won by Jochen Mass, who also scored 1 point in Monaco. Niki Lauda would win the Monaco GP, but not score any points in Barcelona, so Jochen Mass is king. Wrong! The race in Barcelona was stopped after 29 laps due to a crash, so half points were awarded for Jochen Mass, only getting 4.5 points for winning, so he can't possibly catch the 9 points Niki Lauda had for winning the Monaco GP, so we have King Niki. Into 1976 now, and the Long Beach circuit makes its debut, being won by Clay Regazzoni. The Monaco GP was won by Niki Lauda, who was also second in Long Beach, so he is king for the second time. The tracks remain the same for 1977, where Monaco was won by Jody Scheckter, who scored 4 points at Long Beach to become King Jody, beating Niki Lauda by 1 point, who finished second in both races. In 1978, we have 3 street tracks for the first time, as Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Canada joins the F1 calendar for the first time, although it was called the Ile Notre Dame circuit at that time. Patrick Depailler would win in Monaco and got 4 points from Long Beach and 2 in Canada to become King Patrick. The tracks remain the same for 1979. Jody Scheckter wins in Monaco, second in Long Beach, and then got 3 points in Canada to become King Jody for the second time. Into the 1980s now, and once again the tracks do remain the same. Carlos Reutemann wins in Monaco and gets second in Canada to become King Carlos. Going into 1981, and the Caesars Palace car park circuit is introduced, and Alan Jones would win in Long Beach and Caesars Palace, and then get second in Monaco to become King Alan. Into 1982, and we now have 5 street tracks, as we also go to Detroit. John Watson would win in Detroit and get second in Caesars Palace, third in Canada, and most importantly, 1 point in Long Beach to become King John by 1 point from Riccardo Patrese. Caesars Palace is dropped in 1983, so we're back down to 4 street tracks. Keke Rosberg wins in Monaco, got 6 points in Detroit, and got 3 points in Canada to become King Keke. 1984, Long Beach would be dropped and replaced with Dallas. Nelson Piquet would win in Detroit and Canada to become King of the Streets for the first time. Dallas is dropped in 1985 and replaced by Adelaide. Keke Rosberg wins in Adelaide and Detroit, as well as getting 3 points in Canada to become King Keke for the second time. The tracks remain the same for 1986, and Alain Prost would win in Adelaide and Monaco, as well as scoring 4 points in Detroit and 6 in Canada to become King Alain. We go back down to 3 street races in 1987, with Canada taking a break. Ayrton Senna would win in Detroit and Monaco to claim King of the Streets for the first time. Canada then returns in 1988 to bring us back up to 4 races. Prost wins in Adelaide and Monaco and is second in Detroit and Canada to become King Alain for the second time. In 1989, the Detroit circuit was removed and Phoenix was added. Thierry Bousson would become King Thierry, with wins in Adelaide and Canada and 1 point in Phoenix. The tracks remain the same again as we enter the 90s, with 1990, and Ayrton Senna becomes King Ayrton for the second time, winning in Monaco, Canada and Phoenix, and a gearbox failure in Australia ruined Senna's chances of taking F1's second perfect crown. King Ayrton reigns again in 1991 with a win in Monaco and Phoenix. He would also win in Australia, but was only awarded half points due to the race being stopped early due to rain. Senna would again miss out on the perfect crown due to an alternator failure in Canada. In 1992, Phoenix was dropped and we're back down to 3 races again. Gerhard Berger would win in Adelaide and Canada to become King Gerhard, or as I like to call him, the Burger King. 3 races again in 1993, and Ayrton Senna is King of the Streets for the 4th time. Senna wins in Adelaide and Monaco. In 1994, Michael Schumacher becomes King of the Streets for the first time, taking victories in Canada and Monaco. And Damon Hill is King of the Streets for 1995, winning in Adelaide and finished second in Monaco. 1996 sees the Australian GP go from the street track at Adelaide to the street track at Albert Park. Damon Hill wins in Albert Park and Canada to become King Damon for the second time. Michael Schumacher becomes King of the Streets yet again in 1997, with wins in Monaco and Canada and second in Australia. Mika Hakkinen is the king of 1998 with wins in Monaco and Albert Park. A gearbox failure at the start of the Canadian Grand Prix prevents Hakkinen from going for the perfect crown. In 1999 it's King Eddie, with Eddie Irvine taking the crown with a win in Australia, a second in Monaco and a third place in Canada. It's the new millennium now and Michael Schumacher is king of the streets for the year 2000 and for the third time, with wins in Australia and Canada, but a suspension failure in Monaco stops Schumacher from completing the perfect crown. Schumacher is king for the fourth time in 2001, winning in Australia and Monaco, being denied the perfect crown yet again, this time by his brother Ralph, who won the Canadian Grand Prix whilst Michael had to settle for second. It's a fifth king of the streets for Michael Schumacher in 2002, equalling Graham Hill's record. Schumacher won in Australia and Canada and finished second in Monaco. And for 2003, it's King Juan Pablo Montoya, with a win in Monaco and a second in Australia and a third in Canada. In 2004, it is King Rubens Barrichello, becoming the first person since Bruce McLaren in 1960 to become the king of the streets without winning any races in that year. Barrichello was second in Albert Park in Canada and third in Monaco, beating Michael Schumacher by 2 points, who won both Albert Park and Canada, but would crash whilst in the lead of the Monaco GP, which Jarno Trulli would go on to win. It's King Kimi Räikkönen in 2005, with wins in Monaco and Canada, as well as 1 point in Albert Park. Fernando Alonso takes the second ever perfect King of the Streets in 2006, with wins in Albert Park, Canada and Monaco. Lewis Hamilton becomes King of the Streets in his rookie season with a win in Canada, alongside second in Monaco and third in Australia. For the first time since 1991, we have more than 3 street circuits on an F1 calendar in 2008, as we see Valencia and Singapore debut. Lewis Hamilton makes it back-to-back crowns with wins in Monaco and Albert Park, alongside a second in Valencia and third in Canada. Canada takes another break from F1 in 2009, so we're back down to 4 street races, and Rubens Barrichello becomes king of the streets for the second time, and this time he wins a race, taking the victory in Valencia as well as second in Albert Park and Monaco, and picking up 3 points in Singapore. Canada returns in 2010 and Sebastian Vettel is king of the streets with a win in Valencia, second place in Spain and Monaco, and a 4th place in Canada. Vettel makes it back-to-back king of the streets in 2011 with wins in Albert Park, Monaco, Valencia and Singapore, but Jenson Button denies him the perfect crown, overtaking him on the last lap to win the 2011 Canadian GP. Fernando Alonso takes his second crown in 2012 with a win in Valencia, third in Monaco and Singapore, and 4th in Australia and Canada. Valencia leaves F1 in 2013, so we're back down to 4 street tracks, as Sebastian Vettel retakes the crown with wins in Singapore and Canada, a second place in Monaco and a third place in Australia. Nico Rosberg follows in his father's footsteps and becomes the king of the streets in 2014, winning in Australia and Monaco and a second place in Canada. Back-to-back victories for Rosberg, who takes the 2015 crown with a win in Monaco, second in Canada and Albert Park, and a 4th in Singapore. In 2016, the Azerbaijan GP joins the calendar, giving us 5 street tracks. Lewis Hamilton becomes king of the streets for a 3rd time, winning in Canada and Monaco with 2nd in Australia, 3rd in Singapore and 5th in Baku. Hamilton's 4th time as king of the streets arrives in 2017, with wins in Canada and Singapore, 2nd in Australia, and then 10 points from Baku and 6 points in Monaco. Sebastian Vettel retakes the crown in 2018, with wins in Albert Park and Canada, 2nd in Monaco, 3rd in Singapore and 4th in Baku. In 2019, Lewis Hamilton becomes king of the streets for the 5th time, matching the record held by Graham Hill and Michael Schumacher. Hamilton won in Canada and Monaco, with 2nd in Baku and Australia and 4th in Singapore. But then, for the first time since 1953, we have a season with no street tracks due to COVID. Then, street tracks return in 2021, although not all of them. We still don't have Singapore, Canada or Albert Park, but we do gain the Jeddah circuit in Saudi Arabia. Max Verstappen becomes king of the streets for the first time, winning in Monaco and finishing 2nd in Baku. In 2022, we jump up to 7 street tracks as Canada, Singapore and Australia all return, and the Miami circuit joins the calendar. Verstappen gets his second crown, winning in Jeddah, Miami, Baku and Canada, and getting 6 points in Singapore. Going into 2023, we have the new Las Vegas circuit for the first time ever, and we also have a sprint race at a street track, with the Baku Sprint. So now we have 9 street races across the year. Verstappen takes his 3rd crown in a row, winning in Australia, Miami, Monaco, Canada and Vegas. He finished 2nd in Jeddah and Baku and got 3rd in the Baku Sprint and then 5th in Singapore. And finally, we have the 2024 season, the most competitive King of the Streets we have ever seen. The Baku Sprint is replaced with the Miami Sprint, so we still have 9 races, with 3 drivers separated by 1 point at the top. Lando Norris is 3rd with 121 points, but for the first time since 1969, we have 2 drivers on the same points, as Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc both have 122 points. But as Max has 2 wins with Jeddah and Canada, so Leclerc's 1 in Monaco, Verstappen is able to claim it on countback and becomes King of the Streets for the 4th time. So there we have it, every F1 King of the Streets from 1950 to 2024. And as we look at the league table here, we can see there are 18 one-time kings, then there are 10 with 2. It is Jackie Stewart and Juan Manuel Fangio who have won King of the Street 3 times. Then Ayrton Senna, Sebastian Vettel, Sterling Moss and Max Verstappen with 4. Then at the top of the list it is Lewis Hamilton, Michael Schumacher and Graham Hill, who have all won the King of the Streets the most with 5 times each. Who do you think will be King of the Streets in 2025? Can Max Verstappen join the elusive club of 5-time King of the Streets winners? We'll have to wait and see. Until next time, have a good one. Goodbye.